welcome to Friday night. You made it through the week, and what a week. I mean, listen, if you're into true crime, and I think you are, I always say it, if you're watching the show, I think you're into it, this was just a hell of a week. You know, yes, it was fascinating, and it was disturbing, and it was perplexing, but the information that the prosecutors in Rex Heuermann's now quintuple murder case, the information they dropped on us, it was kind of overwhelming. And I don't even know if you have it all yet. We gave you some last night. We kind of gave you like the table of contents. But tonight, I'm giving you chapter and verse. And I gave you a warning last night. I'm going to do the same thing tonight because this stuff is hard. It's uncomfortable. I wanted to belt a whiskey when I went over it for the first time yesterday. And it's going to be difficult tonight because we're going into more detail. The whole planning document that allegedly Rex Heuermann had on his hard drive that they found in the house. Planning document, like how to prep before, during, and after serial murdering. I can't believe you even say these words. How does someone get so far outside of our flock, right? We're here, right? We're all in here, and they're out here. How? Well, these documents kind of give you a bit of an idea, allegedly. I'm going to match the stuff in the documents to the evidence that they have found in the house, to the stuff we know, and by the way, still a lot we don't. Also, Nikki Brass had no idea who she was meeting in 2015. No idea. But now she knows. She went on a date with Rex Heuermann, sat across the table with him. Man, did she hear some things. And tonight you're going to hear them too, because she is live with me tonight. And imagine what it's like to be Nikki, thinking that it's possible she could have been one of his alleged victims, right? Just imagine that. You'll hear from Nikki in a bit. And then also, it's a lot. It's a lot to take in, the stuff that Rex Heuermann is accused of doing. A lot. And that's us. We're not connected to him, right? I didn't go on a date with him. I wasn't his neighbor. I don't even know the guy. I'm getting to know him in a way I really wish I didn't. But there are neighbors who knew him and had dust-ups with him. And one of those neighbors is going to be on the show tonight. And that dust-up is not only really insightful, but it's also super weird. Like that house. In that beautiful neighborhood, there's that house. Decrepit, falling apart, unkempt, and there's that basement. Some insight tonight from that neighbor. He's going to join me live as well. Don't go anywhere. This whole program, special hour on the Long Island serial killing suspect and all the filth we had to sort through this week. If you were with us last night, you saw, and I do stress, you saw us begin to pull apart a document titled HK 2002-04. We didn't call it that last night. And the New York prosecutors who released the document, they don't call it that either. They call it a serial killer's planning document, created, utilized, and painstakingly maintained by one Rex Heuermann, the New York architect. The New York architect now charged with 6 murders dating back 31 years. 31 years. I dare say a bunch of you out there right now aren't even that old. But as we showed you last night, it is a chilling piece of work. It is sadistic, and it is clinical, and it is incredibly comprehensive. But I want to start this special edition of our show with a 2-word phrase that really jumped out at me, not from the document so much itself, but from the court filing that went along with the 2 latest murder counts. Are you ready? It's called file carving. File carving. I know, I'd never heard of that term before either. But it means resurrecting computer files that were deleted or deliberately hidden. Now you got my attention. Everybody knows, or you should know by now, right? You're crime fans, that such things are never really gone. Ooh, they're never gone. And sure enough, the Suffolk County DA's office managed to carve that planning file from a hard drive in Rex Heuermann's basement. And now the lists and the tables and the reminders that Rex Heuermann allegedly relied on to kill and torture sex workers, to dump their bodies, and then just, go about his business. Well, they seem like a blueprint that amounts to a roadmap for the investigators and for prosecutors. In fact, for them, it might be a smoking gun. The next best thing to, say, a confession. All thanks to file carving. File carving. Remember that term. Tonight, I'm going to carve apart the files that were found on Rex's hard drive, and I'm going to match them up with what we know about the Manhattan architect and his ramshackle Long Island home and basement. The document begins with 4 underlined headings. First up, problems, evidence that could get him caught. And then supplies, things he needed to carry out his crimes. Which, by the way, DS is there, and it appears to stand for dump sites, where he allegedly leaves the bodies. And TRG, which seems to mean targets, as in victims. You can see under DS dump sites a reference to Mill Road. The remains of at least 2 of Huerman's alleged victims, Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack, who were found in the vicinity of Mill Road and Ocean Parkway on Long Island, kind of seem to line up. Under TRG, target, you can see the name Megan. Well, Megan Waterman was 22 years old. She went missing in June of 2010 and allegedly was killed by Rex Huerman. The rest of the document is a virtual how-to manual for serial murder. Engaging a victim, setting up a holding area, disposing of the tools and the body when, quote, playtime is over. There's also a section of notes that investigators believe were taken straight from a book that was authored by famous TV mind hunter and former FBI profiler John Douglas. You probably know John Douglas, mind hunter. It's big on TV. This is his biggest book. He's written several books about murder, and police found that well-worn copy and other copies of other books while searching Huerman's home. And speaking of searches, we also have a partial list of Huerman's alleged internet searches. Grab a whiskey, once again, because this stuff is ugly. Tortured redhead porn, girl with face beat up, chubby 10-year-old girl crying, and Asian twink tied up. Without question, I need some experts here to help me out, sort it all out, make some sense of it. But first, one more big observation. As meticulous as the planning document is, it is riddled with insane mistakes, like childish spelling errors. Misleaders is spelled M-I-S-S with a hyphen. Plastic is missing the S. Lie, and that's the type of substance that dissolves bodies. Yeah, it's spelled with an I-E instead of a Y-E. Ratchet, spelled with a D instead of a T. Dumpster, missing the P. He even spells the word evidence wrong. Evidence. And spells destroy multiple times with an I instead of an E. There's an extra U in torture a couple times. And the way he misspells the word organized, not just once, but a whole bunch of, look at it. Originize. It makes the word almost unrecognizable. Again, multiple times, so not just a typo. But is this a highly educated architect who's just a lousy speller? Was he just typing really, really quickly because he was excited and made the same mistakes over and over again? Is it possible the mistakes were intentional? I don't know. And then, of course, the question his defense attorney is sure to pose. Perhaps was this not the work of Rex Huerman at all? I'm joined now by 2 people who have been following this case very closely. Dr. Chris Mahandi is a clinical police and forensic psychologist with more than 25 years' experience assessing and managing violent behavior. Pascal Bobouf hosts the very popular online show, The Pascal Show, which covers true crime. Had a chance to chat with Pascal at CrimeCon last week. Thank you to both of you. So appreciate you being here. Dr. Mahandi, I'm going to start with you. You saw what we all saw this week. It's a lot of reading. I'm sure it's right up your alley with the work you do. But is this typical of a serial killer to keep track, meticulous track of what to do, what's done, and what to do better, next time to improve?
Yeah, there are different types of serial killers. Obviously, there are the ones that even the suspect in this refers to as organized versus disorganized. And, most of them are the organized type, the predator, narcissistic psychopaths who are sadistic in nature, and they're killing for power and dominance over others and to fulfill, various perversions. So, these folks see themselves as hunters. They go to, painful lengths to research what they're going to do to avoid getting caught. So the idea of having journals, operational plans, research, all that is part of the rush that they get. As far as the planning is part of the turn on for them, the stimulation, the build up, if you will. But it also fulfills, in addition to that thrill aspect of it, it's purposeful. It's they see themselves as hunters. They see themselves going out and getting quarry, prey. They're not looking at their victims as the people that they are. Inherently, part of humanity, but they see themselves as entitled to take life and to do so with efficiency and to avoid getting caught. So this is all pretty typical stuff that you would be looking for with a suspect like this. It's not surprising. I've seen plenty of these kinds of, kill and, rape planning lists before, and invariably, an arrogant guy like this alleged suspect, they think they're so smart, yet it's their sense of, I'm so smart, I'm going to beat you guys by playing all these things, researching all this stuff.
Yep.
That is
the superiority complex, right? It always comes back to bite them. The superiority complex. They all think they're smarter. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, they do.
It's their undoing.
Speaking of the details, yeah, they undo themselves with their own ego. Pascal, you have been covering this, and as a journalist, you and I, we wait with bated breath for details, and usually we have to wait till trial, right? We don't usually get this kind of I hate to call it a windfall, but this is a windfall of details that I was not expecting with these two additional charges. Was there, first of all, were you surprised? And second of all, what stood out to you?
Well, I mean, honestly, it was a yes and no. It's kind of a yes and no answer. Yes, because the details in there are just so deeply disturbing and so horrific. I just can't believe anybody wrote these things on paper. I feel like we were tearing a page out of a American Psycho or taking a scene out of Dexter almost. It just seems so odd and so out of pocket. But then on top of that, there's the no because of just the kind of person we're dealing with. I mean, this is an architect. This is somebody who's very meticulous, very on point with plans, this blueprint that we're talking about in this document. It definitely works with the kind of person that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, and I have to keep reminding myself this is all, allegations at this point. It's hard to see how he's going to dig out from underneath the massive mountain of allegations that look pretty cut and dry. But Dr. Mohandy, it is hard not to notice how childish this supposedly well-educated architect is. He can't spell for a dime. And it's embarrassing. I mean, it's heavy, H-E-V-E-Y. I don't mean to cast, mild aspersions, but it just doesn't make sense that someone who is university educated has these kinds of mistakes. Is there something you see I'm not seeing?
No, I mean, obviously one hypothesis is this misdirection on purpose, but to repeatedly misspell words the same way as you've seen in several of the documents, that would be a lot more effort than I think he would be willing to go to an individual like this. I just simply think the individual who did this is simply a bad speller. It's not inconceivable and not inconsistent with some highly educated people that they have specific strengths and weaknesses. Strengths might be in the architect's world, if this is our suspect who's actually found guilty eventually, are the visual spatial kinds of strengths. But when it comes to verbal writing, paragraphs, that kind of thing, you can do a list, but a spelling is a deficiency. So it's not a big deal to me. It's clear he knows what he's talking about, it's just one of those things that's going to be a signature that they'll find in other writings that he has stylistically that they will use to connect him further to these writings.
It's a great point. The signature writings and the spellings and the style and even the writing, analysis sometimes is pretty fascinating stuff. Dr. Mahandi, in a moment, I'm going to ask you about some of the more disturbing things that, came out in these documents. The fact that there was a request for supplies, including a crossbar to make a table stronger. And then something called a hard point, which I had to look up. It's very disturbing. It's the place where you would hook a victim to the ceiling to suspend in sexual bondage. I had to learn a lot of things I preferred not to know. And then also like the hit harder so that you can take them down sooner. Playtime. I'm going to ask you about all of that in a moment. But first I want Pascal to weigh in on whether you think this is now just a slam dunk, whether you think that there's no way to get past everything that we've read, whether it's just game over for Rex Heuermann at this point.
Ashleigh, I got to be honest, it's a wrap. That's what I truly think. But, weirder things have happened. Weirder things have happened in cases, but there is too much pitted against Rex Heuermann right now. It's a slam dunk. We can basically say we already know the results. We already know the verdict. Lock him up, throw him, bury him under that prison. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, one or two things you can, as a defense attorney, say, well, a lot of coincidences here, and there could be, but when there's this, like I said, a mountain of coincidences, it becomes very unreasonable to think that is doubt. It becomes very unreasonable doubt as opposed to reasonable doubt. So, Dr. Mahandi, the other part, the reason I wanted Pascal to answer that first was because jurors are average people. They don't live the world that the three of us live in. They don't read these documents all the time. They're oftentimes seeing these things for the first time, and it is hard to digest, even for seasoned people in the crime space. They're going to hate him. They're going to see these things about the mutilations of women's breasts and the carving out of their tattoos and their markings and their torture marks, where allegedly his documents say carve out their torture marks, make sure you get rid of them. They're going to hate him. Is there anything a defense attorney can do to try to just lighten that load for the jurors and against, their client?
Well, that's a tall order. They may try and dig into his childhood and find some abuse excuse stuff of some sort, but I think it's going to fall on deaf ears because most people that have had troubled childhoods transcend those kinds of situations. And the amount of fantasy that he's engaged in over time, that was the other part of that documentation, all the computer stuff having to do with bondage porn, rape, torture, mutilation. He's had a long history of fantasizing about this before allegedly implementing it. And that's going to be a tall order to get over, particularly with how organized he allegedly was. So I think it's going to be tough. I think the best thing they could do if it's an offer is to plead him out.
Yeah, I think you're right. I've got a couple of attorneys coming up a little later on the show, and that's my number one question. Is it all over but the plea at this point? To both of you, Dr. Chris Mahandi and Pascal Beauboeuf, thank you so much for your wisdom and your insight, and it's nice to see you again, Pascal. It's always nice to see you, Dr. Mahandi, but I just saw Pascal, so thank you both.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Coming
up next, we have a view of Rex Heuermann that no court filing nor any computer hard drive could ever give us. What was it like to date him? Hard to say those words. Nikki Brass sat across a table from a man who police say was a sadistic serial killer. He tried to get her to come home with him. So what made her hesitate? What was it that may have saved her life? Nikki joins me live after a break with reaction to all of the terrifying details that she's also learning, and her lawyer is with her. Next. It is one thing to sit where I am and tell you the extraordinary and tragic story of the Gilgo Beach murders. And it's one thing to sit where you are and then just try to take all these awful details in, right? But take a breath and imagine for a second that you're sitting across a table from the very man who is now accused of seeking out and torturing and killing innocent women like you or your sister or your mom or your daughter. Nikki Brass had that experience. She's a hair and makeup artist who used to work as an escort and says her date with Rex Heuermann in 2015 was one of the more terrifying nights of her life. She adds that it was also very, very strange. And she joins me now with her lawyer, John Ray. Thank you to the both of you. Nikki, let me begin with you if I can. And thank you for coming back on the air to talk about this. Obviously, in a really difficult time for you, because these were very uncomfortable details that we learned this week. A blueprint with hunting and targeting and playtime and supplies, all allegedly Rex Heuermann planning his kills. What's your reaction to the information that you've heard?
Honestly, a lot of the information I already had from him. It was said in a third-person point of view, but he said that stuff before it was released. I already knew.
Tell me about that, because as I recall, he became strange on that date because he seemed to have a fixation with the Gilgo Beach body. So to walk me through what it was he started saying to you on that date.
When we first sat down, we talked about basic stuff, and then it moved to him asking if I knew anything about serial killers or was interested in it, which I did know a lot about serial killers, so we started talking about different serial killers. After we talked about them, which that was like very much third person, just somebody who read about it talking. Then he asked if I had heard of the Gilgo Beach killings, which I'm from Long Island, so I have. And that's when he started to get weird, and it wasn't third person anymore. It seemed more like somebody who was like remembering and enjoying talking about it and just way too detailed. And he said things that like I didn't remember hearing in the news yet.
Did his manner
So,
change? I mean, in the
conversations
conversations you had when you first sat down, it seemed like it was kind of an innocuous shared interest in true crime. Lots of people like true crime. Did his manners?
Yeah.
Did his mannerisms change as you got into the Gilgo Beach murders?
Yeah, he leaned in, he got excited. It seemed like something he like very much wanted to talk about. But not even just talk about. You know the look in someone's eyes when they're remembering something, when they're thinking about it, when they're trying to think about details. It was like that. It wasn't like somebody who read a book and was just spewing facts. It was somebody who was trying to act like they didn't live it.
At what point, Nikki, did you realize that you needed to get out of there? Because as I understand it, he's asking you to come back to his home. And when you're saying no, he's suggesting he drives you to your home. What was your spidey sense that told you, beat it, get out of here?
He had never offered to drive me to my home. He insisted, he asked me if I was going to go with him. He had showed me a white envelope, like implying it had money, but never showed me money. And then asked if I was going to go home with him. I was like really, really uncomfortable. By that point, I had already texted somebody to meet me outside. So I told him like, thank you for dinner, but no thank you. And like, you could tell he was like visibly like annoyed. And he was like, well, why not? And trying to understand. I was like, trying to make excuses. So I was like, you know, it's late. I really don't want to drive that far in the dark. And he was like, no. Like, you'd leave your car here. We'd go on mine. Why would we take two cars? Like, very insistent that if I go, I'm taking his car.
Do you think that you could have been one of these victims?
If I went to his house, yes.
It just gives me the chills to think that you had that strong sense to move on, to get out of there and to ask for someone to meet with you. John Ray, can I ask you about Nikki's
Sure.
Recollections and her encounter with Rex Heuermann? I'm curious if she will end up playing a part in any kind of prosecution if there is a trial. Look, if he pleads, then there's not going to be a trial. But if he doesn't plead and there is a trial, do you think Nikki is going to be a part of it?
It's possible Nikki will be a part of it, but one thing that's notable that I just heard for the first time is that he pulled out this white envelope to pretend that there was money for her. He did exactly the same thing, according to the taxi cab driver who put him together with Shannon Gilbert at the Sayville Motor Lodge. He used a white envelope. And just today, as a result of all these issues, another woman called who had been stalked by him, and he did the same thing. He took a white envelope out and pretended there was money in it and tried to seduce her into staying with him for longer than an hour. Same modus operandi in all three situations. And by the way, we've talked about this greatly, and we really believe that there's an accomplice, at least one accomplice in this case. And if you look at your list that he made, these are check-off lists to make sure he doesn't miss anything. That's what they are. And if you look at under his supplies, he has something that's a giveaway. He says hair, and he's very careful about everything he writes. He says hair nets, plural. One head, one hair net. Hair nets, more than one head. There's an accomplice involved in this. This man knows
or maybe,
exactly
John
what he's
Ray, as I
checking
look
off.
at it, I'm always looking at the benefit of the doubt, even in a case like this, but I think maybe this is for in case there's a rip or in case this is multiple plans ahead. I have to leave it there, but I hope it's not our last conversation. Nikki, thank you so much for coming on. I know this is tough stuff. I'd love to keep in touch with you. And John Ray, as always, I really appreciate your input. Thank you.
As always, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so coming up in just a moment, in a Long Island community of well-kept lawns and very friendly neighbors, one thing was not like the others, and it still isn't. That's the red ramshackle home of Rex Heuermann, his wife and his adult kids who live there too. What did the neighbors know about him? When we come back, one of them has the story of a bizarre encounter that, in hindsight, might just start making some sense. He's live with us next. Massapequa Park is the Long Island village where Rex Heuermann lived actually his whole life. Though the folks there would really prefer that it was known for some of the other native sons, shall we say. Like some pretty famous people lived there. Jerry Seinfeld, the Baldwin brothers, Dee Snider from Twisted Sister. Even that last one there, Joey Buttafuoco. So that was kind of a blight, but not this kind of blight on the neighborhood. The homes are neat, the lawns are mowed, and the neighbors are friendly. But then there's the rundown house that Rex Heuermann grew up in and where his family still lives. It's a shabby red bungalow that police would search from cellar to rafter, not just once, but twice so far. The neighbors have said that it was so odd that a New York City architect, whom they would see every day in a suit and tie, heading off to work, carrying a briefcase, it would be odd that he would live in such a creepy, ramshackle place. As for the Heuermanns themselves, the cashier at the local grocery store called them joyless, and the deli clerk said that Rex was weird. My next guest was a neighbor of the Heuermann family who had his own run-ins with a man who would later become an alleged serial killer. Jimmy Mack, welcome so much. This is great to have you because very few of us can understand anything except what we're seeing on paper, but you know the man. Tell me about this really bizarre encounter you had. He freaked out about your car being parked, and it's parked in your own driveway, as I recall.
Yeah, so I live kind of like right by the train station where he would. So I guess I'm 2 blocks over and 2 blocks down from him, right by the train station. So I just happened to be sitting on my porch the night we had the incident, and I could hear him talking on the corner. He was saying something about, here we go again. He had mentioned something about the girls, which kind of caught my attention, but people walk by there all the time. They're on their phone, so I'm not really thinking about it. About a minute later, I still hear him talking, but he's like directly in front of my house. So now when I stand up on the porch, he's looking directly at my house. So I don't think he expected me to be there. And I certainly didn't expect him to be like looking at my house. So that's when I said, I'm like, are you talking to me? And he goes, yeah. He goes, I warned the girls about the call one time. He goes, now you're going to I'll be back. And now you're going to understand.
Warned the girls. What does that mean? I've warned the girls about the car.
Well, later on, we found out, looking back, I guess maybe like 2 weeks before that, my ex's husband had dropped off the daughter, and he was kind of sticking out. The car was like where the walkway is, so he had to walk around the car. So apparently there was an incident like 2 weeks before that. Not a big deal. Nothing happened of it. But I guess looking back, that's what we think it was. Well, the problem was when he said, oh, no, I'm going to handle it and I'll be back. He said it so nonchalantly. It wasn't like we were in an argument. And I'm just thinking in my head, like, something's not right here. So that's when I started walking down the block, and I kind of blocked them off. Like, you're not going anywhere, man. If you have an issue, we'll handle our business now, you know? And
yeah,
it got pretty heated, and all the neighbors, the lights went on, the phone started ringing, everybody's calling me. They realized it was me.
Wow.
So we just left it as, all right, well, I'm not going to walk down your block anymore. He walked away. So my girl's son had come out. He was standing like the house next to me, because I walked like 3 houses up. And that's when I started walking back, I started replaying some of the things he was saying. There was a few more words said. And I heard a couple I wish I would have paid more attention to what he was saying on the corner. But there was just things that weren't making sense. So I'm like, I need to find out where this guy lives, because I know I had seen him before. So I jumped in my car. He went in the house. My neighbor directly next door called me, and I kept him on speakerphone. So I went 2 blocks. By the time I found him, he must have saw me coming, like when I pulled my car over. So he dipped in between the 2 houses. So now I don't know which house he's in. I just wanted to know. It bothered me enough that it made me say, I need to know where this guy lives.
And as I understand it, Jimmy, when you heard that there was this alleged killer in the neighborhood, you instantly thought of him, and you said you knew it was him.
Yeah,
there's like another incident, right? Like, I only have a couple seconds left, but there's this other incident that Rex had some run-in with your wife as well. Can you just briefly tell me what that is?
Well, about 2 or 3 weeks later, we had left it. The short of it, we had left it that he's not going to walk down my block anymore. So my wife was walking the dog, and he had looked at her. She didn't know it was him because I just described her. She figured it out. She had seen he just looked directly at her and then saw my car wasn't there and then walked down the block, and I kept staring at her. But she never told me until after he got arrested, because she didn't want me to make a big deal of it. But I felt uncomfortable enough in the situation. Yeah, the situation was bad enough that I told my friends where he lived, who he was, just in case something happened and he came back. So it was, it was enough for me to think something wasn't right here. And especially when I saw the house, I said, "Oh, that's the guy that lives in that red house." Like, so then it really kind of.
So Jimmy,
I didn't expect that.
Jimmy, can I just ask you just a one sentence, because I am really over, but I've got to hear from you in one sentence. What's your reaction to all the information we're learning from the courts?
It shocked, but not shocked.
Wow.
And
that says a lot.
Yeah. After the run-in I had with him. Yeah.
Jimmy Mack, I will be calling on you again. I don't think we're done with this story, but thank you so much for doing this, especially on a Friday night. Appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you so much. And coming up next, folks, more of Rex Heuermann's so-called blueprint for murder. It looks bad, right? It looks worse than bad, but making lists and notes to self is not a crime, no matter how demented those notes are. In the hands of a skilled attorney, can it all be explained away or even thrown out entirely? After a break, 2 of the best legal minds in the business, one from the defense side, the other a prosecutor. Is Rex finished, or is this case just getting started? That's next.
Glucose levels. No finger sticks needed. All with the world's smallest and thinnest sensor. Manage your diabetes with more confidence and lower your A1C. Try it for free at freestylelibre.us.
At the top of the show, I mentioned the term file carving. But here's another term that jumps out from Rex Heuermann's so-called planning document. hard point. And if you know right away what those two words mean together, then apparently you and I travel in very different circles. Because according to the prosecution's court filing, hard point comes from the field of sexual suspension bondage, which is another phrase that I'd never heard before today. And that refers to, quote, a fixed attachment point in the ceiling that supports the weight of an individual being suspended off the ground, end quote. Now let me take you to last July, almost a year ago, just after Rex Heuermann was arrested. State and local police went through Heuermann's house. The tarps went up, and oh man, the boxes and boxes and just junk that they were carting out. There were piles of firearms, rifles, handguns. There were posters and Playboy magazines and even a child-sized creepy doll. There were paintings of women and a well-known book about serial killers. And then they went back to the house just last month, and they hauled away a whole bunch more stuff. And we don't know yet whether that includes any of the specific items from Heuermann's alleged planning doc, like heavy ropes, for instance, or booties, or drain cleaner, or hard points. But if it does, it would be pretty hard for a defense attorney to later claim in court that that grisly how-to manual was just fantasy. Or actually, would it be? Sarah Azari is a trial attorney and NewsNation legal analyst, and Dave Ehrenberg is a state attorney for Florida's 15th Judicial District in Palm Beach County, both friends of the show. Okay, I'm going to start with you, Sarah, because, woof, this is just a mountain of bad facts. But is it slam dunk?
No, Ashleigh, it's not slam dunk. You know, up until yesterday, I thought the strongest evidence against Heuermann was the DNA, of course. But the DNA just put him in contact with these sex workers, and it didn't necessarily make it murderous, right? But the blueprint that you just referenced really threw a wrench in this case. But to me, it's still not slam dunk because, as you said, it could be a sick fantasy. But more importantly, the defense needs an opportunity to take a very deep forensic dive into this case. What device did this come from? When was it created? Who created it? Then they're talking about deletions, right? That he had some sort of a forensic, sort of a whatever machine, whatever software that was deleting documents. Well, was he deleting other things? I mean, some people like me delete things. They empty their trash can multiple times a day. So context matters. Prosecutors come in with these snapshots, and prima facie, it looks horrendous for him. And it really sort of ties in the DNA with the torture, murder, and then now we've got two people dismembered, and it's terrible. But again, the defense needs to do a deep forensic dive, figure out how this document was uncovered. And remember, Ashleigh, that the defense is pointing the finger at that initial investigator who was fired due to corruption, and they're saying that there were one or more other suspects that were not followed up on. So, we don't know where the defense is going.
Yeah, I feel like the only way this documentation's, gonna go over in a courtroom is if it just doesn't go into that courtroom at all, if it's suppressed. But Dave Ehrenberg, the one thing that just I can't get out of my mind is the blueprint for removing the torture marks and the tattoos and the sexual gratification and the playtime and the nipples are missing and all these awful things that match the bodies. That the blueprint matches the actual markings on the bodies. How do you get past that?
You don't. That blueprint is devastating. Also, when combined with the DNA evidence, which is really powerful, and the evidence of the burner phones tied to Rex Heuermann, I mean, this is a really good case. That body prep section within this planning document, Ashleigh, includes a note, as you correctly said, to remove the head and hands, which clearly relates to two victims, Jessica Taylor and Valerie Max Remains. That's how they were found, decapitated and dismembered at their arms below their elbows. And then you have this section about removing tattoos. Well, guess what? That was Jessica Taylor's body where he removed the tattoo, allegedly, so that that she could not be identified. So yes, it looks like this killer is following this game plan, and the game plan was found on Rex Heuermann's computer.
I have 10 seconds left, 5 seconds for each of you. Plea deal, Sarah? Yes or no? Is it going to happen?
Maybe, maybe not. I think, we're still in discovery. Discovery yields more investigation and more discovery. And so at some point, maybe.
Got to go yes or no, because I'm 20 seconds to the end of the show, Sarah. I love you to pieces, but it's a yes or no only.
Not yet.
Quick, Dave, yes or no? Plea deal? Okay, not yet.
No,
Dave,
no way.
Yes or no?
No way.
Ooh, wow. Okay. Have you both back. See how this goes. Thank you to both of you. So appreciate it. Sarah Azari and Dave Ehrenberg, as always. And for us, thank you all for joining us. We are flat out of time, but is it really possible that Rex Heuermann's wife and kids could have no idea about this? Wow, that's next. We're back right after this. In a case like Rex Heuermann's, sadly, there are other people whose lives are ruined, notwithstanding the victims who were tortured and murdered, and the murder victims' families who suffered like immeasurable loss. But Rex had a family too, right? Still does. Wife, kids, who did not invite any of this. And it is important to note that the investigators believe that they played no part in these crimes. Let me repeat that. Investigators believe they are not involved. The prosecutors have said his alleged murders took place while his wife and kids were away. And just this week, we learned of a date book that allegedly belonged to Rex, showing his wife out of town during Jessica Taylor's disappearance in 2003. Prosecutors wrote this: the murders of all 4 charged victims, and now the murder of Ms. Taylor, occurred at times when defendant Heuermann's wife and children were located out of state, which would have allowed defendant Heuermann unfettered time to execute his plans for Ms. Taylor, which included the decapitation, dismemberment, and transportation of her remains, without any fear that his family would uncover or learn of his involvement in these crimes. For now, despite her quick divorce filing, Asa Ellerup seems to be standing by her man, visiting him in prison, jail. But maybe she's in disbelief. Maybe her beliefs are changing with all the week's evidence that she's going to have to digest. That is it for us. Thank you, as always, for watching. And as always, stay tuned, because Cuomo's next.
Hello, I'm Chris Cuomo. Happy Friday. Let's get after it. Things got emotional today in the Biden trial. Hunter's lawyer called one of Hunter's daughters, Naomi Biden, to the stand. She testified she visited her father in rehab months before he bought the gun, and he seemed the, quote, clearest, unquote, he'd been in years. Hunter's daughter also testified days after he bought the gun, he still seemed great. This directly contradicts the testimony of Ashleigh Biden, his brother's widow, whom Hunter, too, had a relationship with after his brother's death. Now, even though Naomi is 30 years old, she's an adult, putting a daughter on the stand to testify about your addiction shows how sordid and how desperate this situation is enough